Please don't make the same mistake I did, and when I say mistake, I don't mean the kind people like to whisper about over fences or behind church doors. I mean the quieter kind, the kind that begins long before anyone touches your hand, long before anyone says something they shouldn't, the kind that starts when you've lived beside your own life for so many years that you forget it is still yours. You forget that your heart can go hungry while your table stays full, that a woman can be faithfully married for 36 years and still feel in certain rooms and at certain hours as though no one has truly looked at her in a very long time. Not telling you this to excuse myself. At my age, excuses are embarrassing things. I'm telling you because if you are a woman who has spent most of her life caring for others, smoothing tablecloths, remembering birthdays, saving jars because they might be useful, folding your husband's shirts the way he likes them, even when he is hardly home enough to notice, then maybe you will understand how danger does not always arrive dressed like danger. Sometimes it comes looking like a simple kindness. Sometimes it sounds like a young man standing at your gate, asking very gently, "Are you happy I was 59?" That spring, almost 60 though, I had begun telling people around 60 because it made the number feel less sharp. My husband Tim had been working away from home more often than not. He managed regional projects for a construction company and was forever on the road, forever in another town, another hotel, another noisy restaurant where men loosened their ties and talked over grilled meat and invoices. He was not a cruel man, let me say that plainly. He never raised a hand to me, never insulted me in the ugly ways some husbands do. Never left me wanting for food or medicine or a roof that did not leak. If anything, that was part of the problem. He was decent, reliable, predictable. A man who believed love was proven through provision, and once that duty was met, everything else could safely be assumed. For years, I let it be assumed. Our marriage had settled into something soft around the edges and hollow in the center. We spoke, of course. We discussed Bill's, our married daughter in Ankara, my sister's blood pressure, whether the fig tree needed trimming, whether his shirts had been picked up from the cleaner. When he came home, he would set down his bag, wash his hands, kiss the air near my cheek, and ask what was for dinner. I would tell him. He would eat. Sometimes I'd fall asleep in his chair with the television talking to itself. Sometimes in bed, he would turn toward me out of habit, not desire exactly, but memory of desire. Even his tenderness had become a routine, like checking. If the front door was locked, that may sound ungrateful. I know how many women would say, "At least he comes home. At least he doesn't drink. At least he provides." I said those things to myself so often they became a prayer. At least, at least, at least. But at least is a poor blanket in winter. It covers the body and leaves the heart cold. That year, the house had grown too quiet for me. The refrigerator hummed, the clock in the hall clicked, the lace curtain above the sink moved when there was wind. I found myself lingering over small tasks just to hear some sign of life, rinsing tea glasses, twice rearranging the jars of lentils and rice, shaking out rugs that did not need shaking. In the afternoons, I would sit on the back step with a cup of tea gum lukewarm in my hand and listen to the neighborhood settling into evening. The bark of a dog, a child called in for supper, a pressure cooker hissing somewhere nearby. I had everything I was supposed to have, and still I felt as though I had gone missing inside my own day's Chem, noticed none of this. Or perhaps he noticed and did not know what to do with it. Men of his generation were not raised to ask certain questions. They ask if the car needs fuel, not whether a woman's spirit has begun to dim at the edges. If I sounded tired on the phone, he would say, "Get some rest." If I grew quiet, he would assume I was thinking of something practical. He never asked, "Are you lonely?" And I never said yes, more than I know how to explain. The man who did ask me something close to that was named Emery, worked with my husband, though not directly under him. Younger by perhaps 15 years, maybe a little more early 40s, I think. Old enough to be settled, young enough that his energy still entered a room before he did. He had come to our house once or twice before with documents for some to sign, and once for dinner after a long workday when they were both passing through town. I remembered him only vaguely then, polite, tall, attentive. In a way younger people rarely are now, as if he had not yet learned the modern habit of glancing past you mid-conversation. He called me Abla at first, then Hanım Effendi, teasingly, always with respect. He had a calm face, the kind that made space. Around your words, nothing about him suggested trouble. The first time I truly noticed him, it was raining not. A dramatic storm, nothing fit for novels, just one of those slow, stubborn spring rains that darken the roads and pull the smell of wet soil up into the air. I had gone to the market with 2 cloth bags and stayed too long comparing tomatoes, because that is what lonely women do. They make conversations with produce and pretend it is preference, not postponement. By the time I came out, the rain had thickened. I stood under the awning with my bags cutting into my fingers, telling myself I would wait it out though. I knew from the color of the sky that I might be waiting. An hour car pulled up near the curb. The passenger window slid down. Mrs. Eleni leaned closer, peering through the rain, and there he was, Emra. His sleeves rolled, hair damp at the temples, one hand on the steering wheel. He smiled in that careful way of his, not bold, not familiar. Please, he said, let me drive. You home, you'll be soaked. I hesitated. I don't know why exactly. It was a simple thing, a practical thing. My husband's coworker offering a ride in the rain, but something in me had already grown too alert to kindness. Still refusing would have been sillier than accepting, so I got in, gathering my skirt, apologizing for the water on my shoes, as if it were a personal failing. Car smelled faintly of coffee and wet wool. There was a folder on the back seat, a pen clipped to the visor, and on the dashboard. One of those little pine tree fresheners men hang up when they want to pretend their cars are not just cars. He took the heavier bag from me and set it at my feet. You should have called someone, he said. I wasn't expecting the rain. He glanced at me, then back at the road. That isn't what I meant. It was such a small sentence. I've replayed it many times, not because it was flirtation. It wasn't, because it carried in the gentlest possible way the suggestion that someone should have been available. To me, someone should have thought of the woman leaving the market in bad weather. Someone should have made sure she wasn't. Alone with 2 heavy bags and aching hands, I looked out the window so he would not see how much that touched me. He asked after. Sam asked after my daughter, asked if the peach preserves had turned out well last year, because he said he remembered my husband boasting about them at work. Imagine that my husband had mentioned my preserves to another man, but not once had he. Told me he was proud of them. I almost laughed at the strangeness of it when we reached my gate. Emmer got out with the bags despite my protests and carried them to the porch. Rain dripped from the leaves of the grapevine. The key stuck the way it always did in damp weather. I was fumbling with it when he said very quietly, "You don't have to do everything alone, you know." The door opened. I turned to answer, but all I said was thank you for the ride. He gave a small nod, almost formal. Of course, that should have been the end of it, but life, especially at my age, has a sly way of revealing how little it takes to wake something sleeping. Not passion, not even desire at first. Just awareness. After that afternoon, the house felt different to me. Not warmer, exactly sharper. I noticed my own reflection more. The way my hair had silvered near my temples. The way I tucked it behind my ear when I was thinking. The faded softness of my cardigans. I heard my own laugh when my sister phoned and realized I had not used it much lately. It embarrassed me how much one small kindness had unsettled me. Week later, Emra stopped by with a file for Sam. My husband was away, of course. I almost didn't open the door after seeing who it was through the curtain, because I was still cross with myself for thinking of the man at all, but not answering would have been ridiculous, so I let him in only as far as the entryway, where the floor always smells faintly of soap and old wood. He held up the folder. Your husband asked me to leave this. I took it. He could have told me. He said he did. There was a pause. Then, with a slight smile, he may have forgotten we both knew he was being kind. Some forgot many things that were not attached to work. He forgot if I had a doctor's appointment, unless I reminded him twice. He forgot stories I had told him. He forgot the names of the women I met for tea on Thursdays, but he never forgot a client number or a delivery date. I should not have felt the sting of that in front of another man. Yet I did. It's raining again, and Riz said, glancing toward the window, "Yes, you always get caught in it. Only when someone is around to notice." That surprised us both. It was more candid than I intended. He didn't laugh. He looked at me for a moment in a way that made me wish I had lipstick on, then wish I had no face at all. "Would you like a coffee?" I heard myself ask. Since you're here, he hesitated only long enough to make it respectful. "If it's no trouble, no trouble." That phrase built half my adult life. I made coffee in the small pot with a dented handle. The kitchen smelled of cardamom because I had ground some that morning. Rain tapped at the window. He stood near the table, not sitting until I had sat first. We talked about ordinary things, the roadworks near the old school, his mother's arthritis, my daughter's insistence that I learn to use video calls properly. But with him, even ordinary talk felt like opening a window in a room I had forgotten was stuffy at one point. I apologized for the plain biscuits on the plate. He looked genuinely puzzled. "Why, they're store-bought. Are still on your plate," he said. "That makes them hospitality. You may think none of this sounds like much. That is because the heart does not leap only at grand declarations. Sometimes it moves because someone notices you are apologizing for things that require no apology when." He left. He stood in the doorway and said, "Take care, Mrs. Olaney." Don't know what came over me then. Perhaps I wanted to prove to myself that I was not trembling inside like a girl. Perhaps I wanted to dismiss the charge in the air by naming something harmless. So I said lightly, "You are very attentive. It must make life complicated." He met my gaze, "Only when I can't unsee things after." He was gone. I washed the 2 coffee cups by hand, even though they were barely used. I set them on the rack and watched the water gather at their rims. My heart was beating too fast for such a small encounter. I was ashamed of that, more than ashamed. I was frightened, not of him, of myself. There is a particular kind of guilt that comes to women like me. It is not the guilt of action, but of aliveness. I had been dutiful for so long that even being stirred by attention felt like betrayal. I told myself not to think of him. I prayed while folding laundry. I called my daughter and asked too many questions about the children just to fill my head with something safe. I cooked one of Sam's favorite meals for no reason, as though good lentil soup could restore the order inside me, but the truth had already slipped in. I liked being seen. After that, our meetings remained accidental enough to excuse and frequent enough to matter. At the bakery one morning, he was ahead of me in line and stepped aside so I could go first because he said, "You know better than I do which bread is worth waiting for." At the pharmacy, he reached for the same packet of lozenges in her hands. Brushed, it was nothing, skin meeting skin for less than a second, yet I felt it for hours afterward, absurdly aware of my own wrist, my fingers the pulse at my throat. Once I ran into him near the riverside path where people walk in the evenings. I had taken to going there alone after supper when the house felt too full of silence. The poplar trees were tossing in the wind, and the air smelled green and cool with that scent water has just before dusk. He fell into step beside me without presumption, matching my pace. "You walk here often?" he asked lightly. "Why?" Lately I smiled. "Do you always ask follow-up questions only when I think the first answer isn't the real one?" I should have been offended. Instead, I laughed. It startled me, that laugh. Birds rose from the reeds ahead of us. For a few minutes, we said nothing. Sometimes silence with the right person feels more intimate than confession. Finally, he asked, "Are you happy there?" It was simple as a teacup set on a table. "Are you happy?" I looked straight ahead. That is a large question for a walking path it must still have. An answer at my age, you do not expect to be asked such things. People assume your life is settled. They ask about your knees, not your heart. I wanted to say yes, because yes is what decent women say. I wanted to say, of course, because what right had. I to complain instead. I have a good life. He was quiet for a moment. That isn't the same answer. I still remember the sound of gravel under our shoes, the pale edge of evening light on the water, a woman farther ahead tugging a little boy by the hand, all the ordinary world continuing while one question opened like a door inside Mano. I said at last, "It isn't he," did not press me. That may be why I told him more. Not everything, never everything, but enough. That my husband was away so often, I sometimes spoke aloud just to hear a human voice in the kitchen, that I had become efficient in place of joyful, that some mornings I woke with the strange feeling that I had misplaced myself and could not remember where he listened without rushing. To comfort me, which is its own kind of comfort, men often fix too quickly what they do not want to feel. Emery simply listened before we parted. He said, "You deserve to be asked that question." I went home and sat in the dark dining room for nearly 20 minutes before turning on the light. If you are wondering whether I told my husband any of this, the answer is no. Not then. At that stage, even speaking Emra's name to him felt dangerous, though nothing proper had happened. That is how these things grow, not through scandal, but through secrecy around perfectly innocent moments. I hated that secrecy, and yet I protected it. I kept those walks, those coffees, those chance meetings tucked away in the fold of my day like hidden notes. Still let me be honest, not all of it was innocent in my heart. I began to notice what I wore when I might run into him. I chose the blue cardigan because he had once said it suited me. I pinned my hair differently. I put a little rose water behind my ears one afternoon and then stood at the sink furious with myself. What was I doing? Trying to look pretty for a man who was not my husband. At 60, it would have been laughable if it had not felt so serious, and yet, alongside the guilt, something else was happening. I was waking up, not as a lover, no, as a person. I started reading again in the evenings instead of letting the television mutter until bedtime. I bought fresh flowers for the table just because the yellow ones looked cheerful. I took longer walks. I found myself humming while peeling apples. The attention I received from him had done something dangerous, yes, but it had also reminded me that I existed beyond usefulness, that I was still a woman with an inner life, not just a keeper of schedules and cupboards. This is why I say the mistake comes earlier than people think. The mistake was not meeting him for coffee. It was waiting so many years to admit how starved I had become. The turning point came in late June on a hot afternoon when the whole town seemed to be napping behind drawn curtains. Sem had been away nearly 2 weeks. The tomatoes on the balcony were drooping in the heat, and I was trying to fix the stubborn latch on the back gate with a screwdriver that kept slipping in my hand. I heard a car stop outside. When I looked up, there was Emery. He had come with a small box of parts for something my husband had asked him to drop off. He saw me crouched by the gate and asked what I was doing fighting with. Old metal, I said. May too should have said no. Not because it was improper, but because by then I knew too well what even 10 extra minutes with him could do to the rest of my day. Instead, I handed him the screwdriver. We stood close in the heat while he worked. I could smell sun on his shirt, iron from the latch, basil from the pots nearby. A fly buzzed against the screen door. Sweat gathered at the base of my neck, and I became absurdly aware of it. He tightened one screw, tested the latch, then looked at me with that half-smile of his. "They're rescued. You make simple things look heroic only because you were prepared to do them alone." There was tenderness in that, but also something else by then. Something neither of us was naming. I thanked him and offered cold tea. He accepted. We sat at the kitchen table with glasses beaded in condensation. The fan turned lazily overhead, clicking every fourth rotation. We talked, but not the way we had before. The carefulness was thinning. He asked if Sem Would be home soon, I said, probably Sunday. He asked if I was looking forward to that. I said I always do. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "That wasn't a yes." Either I set down my glass. "You should stop asking me questions." Why? Because I answer. Them and you don't want toy could have lied. I should have lied. Instead, I said, "I don't know what I want." The fan clicked. Outside, someone started a lawn trimmer. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he said very softly, "Neither do." And that was the first moment the air between us stopped pretending to be ordinary. I remember the exact position of his hands on the glass. Long fingers, no ring. I remember the line of sunlight across the tablecloth. I remember wanting more than anything shameful to rest, lower the weight of being sensible and married and responsible, and simply sit inside the truth of being wanted of being. Understood he broke the silence first. I need to say something, and if I'm wrong, I'll regret it and leave my throat tightened. There and now, let me say it properly. He took a breath. "I think about you when I shouldn't. Not because I want to harm your life. I respect you too much for that, but I think about whether anyone takes care of you, whether anyone asks how you are, and waits for the real answer. And I think you know that at my age, you imagine certain moments belong to younger women. The confession, the impossible pause, the feeling that one sentence has set a match to a room full of dry paper, but there I was. Nearly 60, with my heart beating like a foolish thing. "Yes," I said. My voice sounded thin. I know that he nodded once, as if that cost him something. "And I think you feel something too." He looked down at my hands, these hands that had bathed babies needed. Dough buttoned school uniforms, signed forms, buried parents, folded grief into drawers, and kept going. They trembled, yes. I whispered nothing. Happened. That is important. No dramatic move across the table. No grabbing, no desperate kiss, no fall into sin. The way people like to imagine, he stayed where he was. I stayed where I was. The fan clicked overhead. A dog barked in the next yard. The world remained astonishingly normal while the truth sat between us breathing. Finally, he said, "What do you want me to do?" I have thought about my answer. Many times I could have said, "Stay." I could have asked for 1 hour of selfishness, 1 afternoon of forgetting my age, my vows, my name. I could have leaned into the hunger that had been building in me for months. Some women do not judge them as harshly as I once might have. Loneliness can make a warm hand feel like rescue, but I knew even then that whatever comfort began there would not remain gentle. It would rot, not because he was bad or I was wicked, but because hidden things distort themselves, and because I did not actually want another man's life. I wanted my own life to wake up, so I asked him the question he had asked me, "Are you happy?" I said. He let out a breath. That was almost a laugh and almost sorrow. Not at this table, neither am I. We looked at each other then with a kind of exhausted honesty. Two adults, not children, no fantasy left in the room, just longing and decency wrestling quietly in the summer. "Heed," I said, "if we keep doing this, I will begin waiting for you, and I am too old to build my life around waiting for a man again." That brought something to his face, pain, admiration. "I don't know. You shouldn't," he said. No, he stood. I did too, though. My knees felt weak. For one terrible second, I thought he might step toward me. A part of me wanted him to. A larger part prayed he would not. He did not. He only said then I should go. Yes, at the door he paused. "For what it's worth, I think you deserve more than the life you have settled for." That hurt more than if he had touched me after he left. I cried. Not prettily, not the dignified tears of literature. I stood by the sink with one hand over my mouth and cried like a woman grieving something that had not actually died because it had never been fully born. Then I washed my face, watered the tomatoes, and made myself sit down some. Came home 2 days later, sunburned and tired, and full of complaints about delayed shipments. He hugged me harder than usual, perhaps because he had been away so long. I held him and thought, this is my husband, this is the man I built a life with. Not a thrilling life, perhaps, but a real one. A life with winters and bills and funerals and grandchildren and repairs and habits and history. A life in which my name had been spoken thousands of times, even if sometimes carelessly. That night, lying beside him, I listened to his breathing. The old resentment was there, yes, but under it was another truth I had avoided. Because it was less dramatic, I had helped create the silence between us. I had become so practiced in managing disappointment that I stopped asking for anything. I let him assume. I let years pass unchallenged. I made myself smaller because it seemed easier than risking unmet needs. The next morning, while he sat at the table with his tea and the newspaper folded beside him, I asked Sam, "Are you happy?" He looked up as if I had spoken in another language. "What kind of question is that? A real one?" He frowned slightly. "Why are you asking?" "Because I want to know, and because no one asks us things like that once we've been married this long. They just assume we are what we are." He set down his glass. The teaspoon made a small sound against the saucer. "I don't know," he said at last. "I thought I was doing what I was supposed to do. It was not a beautiful answer, but it was honest. So was mine." We talked for a long time that morning, longer than we had talked in years. I did not tell him about Emra. Some truths illuminate, others only scorch. But I told him I was lonely. I told him I felt more managed than cherished, more accommodated than known. I told him I was tired of being grateful for scraps of attention dressed as stability. He was defensive. At first, then wounded, then quiet. I suppose he had his own confessions too. Fatigue, pressure, the strange numbness of becoming a man whose usefulness had replaced his tenderness. We were both older than our years. In that conversation, nothing changed. Overnight, let me not romanticize middle-age repair. He did not suddenly become poetic. I did not become a glowing bride again. Change at our age is awkward. It limps before it walks. But certain things did shift. He began calling from the road for no reason other than to ask how my day had been. The first few times I almost laughed from shock. Once he brought me peaches from a town he had passed through because he remembered. I liked the white-fleshed ones best, remembered such a small miracle. I told him when I was hurt instead of going cold. He listened imperfectly, but more than before. We began taking evening tea on the balcony when he was home without the television. Just the two of us and the plants and the fading light. As for Emra, I saw him only once after that afternoon. It was at a distance near the municipal building. He was crossing the street with a folder under his arm. He saw me, I saw him. We both slowed just slightly, that involuntary pause people have when they are deciding what they owe a shared history. Then he lifted a hand in a small respectful greeting. Not sad, not hopeful, just gentle. I did the same, and that was all. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had been younger, lonelier, braver, more foolish. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if he had met me 10 years earlier before. I had worn myself into habit, but wondering is not the same as wishing, and at my age, I have learned the difference matters. Do I regret it? Yes and no. I regret needing another man's attention to hear the emptiness in my own life. I regret how close I came to building a secret instead of speaking a truth. I regret that part of me still warms faintly and involuntarily when I remember being asked a question no one else had thought to ask, but I do not regret waking up. That is the difficult part to admit. Nothing happened, and yet something did. A line was approached and not crossed. A hunger was maimed and not fed. A marriage was disturbed, not destroyed. And I, a woman nearly 60, learned that restraint is not the same as lifelessness. Sometimes the most moral choice is not the one that feels pure. Sometimes it is the one that forces you to stop lying to yourself. So if you are listening to me now, if you are somewhere in the middle or later stretch of your life, setting down plates, answering messages, carrying on as though quiet, disappointment is simply adulthood. Let me tell you this much. Be careful what you starve in yourself. Someone kind may come along and notice someone younger, gentler, more attentive than the person you share a name and house with. And the danger will not be that he tempts you into sin. The danger will be that he reminds you that you still have a pulse you. May think that sounds romantic. It isn't. It is costly because once you wake up, you cannot go back to sleep so easily. You must either betray your life or change it, and change, even honorable change, asks a price. These days when I stand at the sink, and the evening light turns the glass bowl amber when I hear Sam moving around in the next room looking for his reading glasses that are almost always on his head. When the kettle begins its soft rattle and the basil on the balcony gives off its peppery smell after watering, I think of that season sometimes, not with the burning shame I felt at first, not with longing exactly. More like one thinks of a road not taken after a storm whose passed sim still works too much. I still get lonely sometimes. We are not transformed into characters from a late life romance, but now, every so often, he will look up from his tea and ask, awkwardly as a man learning a new language, "Are you all right?" And sometimes when he remembers, he asks the better question, "Are you happy?" I have learned not to answer too quickly. Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes it is not yet. Sometimes it is, I am learning, and perhaps that is the truest thing. I can leave you with a woman does not become finished simply because she has been married a long time. She can still be startled. She can still be lonely. She can still be seen. And she can still choose. Please don't make the same mistake I did. Don't wait for a stranger to ask the question your own life is begging you to answer.